Okay, so we're now recording. So welcome to a UNCG Libraries Research and Application webinar on Theses and Dissertations 101 by Rachel Olson. And Rachel, take it away now.
Great, thank you, Sam. So my name is Rachel Olson. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me here in a minute. But this is a presentation on theses and dissertations. The link to these slides is on this slide, and we can put it in the chat as well. I can't see the chat. I only have one monitor today. So please feel free to put questions in the chat. And there are also librarians here, several librarians here, who very well may I know for a fact know more about some of this stuff than I do. So please feel free if any of y'all notice something, want to jump in, have a good tip to share. I'm not a very formal person in these sorts of things, so please feel free to unmute. So I'm Rachel Olson. I'm an associate professor as well as the outreach and engagement librarian at UNCG, and I work with several different subjects, mostly in the sort of social sciences. So that's just a little bit about me. We will talk more about subject librarians at UNCG and what that means for people. So this is just like an agenda of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to start out with some disclaimers. We'll move through a little bit of just kind of defining things so we have a common understanding of what we're talking about. I will show you how to find theses and dissertations online, a few methods. There are more. Citing these, so ETD, before we go forward, stands for electronic theses and dissertations. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but that's what that means. Preparing and submitting them, what happens after you submit them, and then library resources we have for ETDs. So I am going to have to jump between my slides and some search interfaces here and there, so I'm sorry about that. I will try to make the transition quick and smooth. So I have three disclaimers, I think. So number one, the information in this presentation pertains to traditional practices in American colleges and universities. So if you are watching and you're a student in another country, or you're, someone who is not in the American college or university system, just know that some of these practices probably differ greatly around the world. This is general advice or general information related to dissertations and theses. Your program, if you are a student, may have its own specific requirements and recommendations. Not all programs at the graduate level require a thesis or a dissertation. There are different projects, different forms that this can take. So please do not take the things in this presentation to be absolutely true at all times for everyone. Also, there are lots of quote guides out there on ETDs. I've seen lots of videos and web pages, things like that. Some of them are great, some of them are less helpful. So please be sure to follow your own institution's guidance. Another thing I should have put on here is that I recommend speaking to a librarian, particularly your subject librarian or any of the great folks that work at UNCG, because we can provide you with some assistance. My dog has chosen this moment to slurp water very loudly. I'm hoping you cannot hear that. So, a couple definitions. According to Merriam-Webster, a thesis is, they actually start out, it's a dissertation, which embodies the results of original research and especially substantiating a specific view. And their definition of dissertation, which you can click on and explore later, is just like a lengthy treatment of a particular subject, usually in writing. So it's kind of they're closely related terms, thesis and dissertation. You've also got a couple different definitions. I remember in school, they would say, okay, what's the thesis of your paragraph, or what's the thesis of your paper? Like a thesis as a like a statement of sort of purpose, or a statement of this is what I'm gonna talk about. So there's different definitions for it. You also may have heard of thesis in other settings. So Aristotle has a long sort of definition of what a thesis is in one of his works. And then Martin Luther, in the early 1500s, famously published the 95 Theses, which were a series of statements related to the sale of indulgences on the part of the Catholic Church. We could talk a lot about that, but we won't today. So you've probably heard this term before, maybe in other settings. So for our purposes, a thesis, excuse me, is typically completed at the master's level. of graduate study in college, and a dissertation is typically completed at the doctoral level. They are both extensive research papers that focus on a particular subject within a given discipline. And the average length varies. In my experience, a dissertation is usually going to be longer than a thesis, although the length of dissertations and theses themselves can vary widely depending on the subject, depending on when and where it's published. So it's really interesting to see, and we may see some of that today as we are kind of looking through some of these things. I've seen dissertations that are hundreds of pages long, and I've seen dissertations that are 40, 50 pages long. So it's interesting. So finding electronic theses and dissertations, there are several different resources that I would like to recommend to you. And I'll say that this is not the only way to find these. There are even a couple that I left off of this slide just because for the sake of time. These are the ones that I suggest, particularly for UNCG users. So you have NC Docs, which is UNCG's institutional repository. It's open access, which is an advantage that it definitely has, because after you graduate from UNCG, you will not have access to your email address anymore at some point, which means you will no longer have access to library databases like Dissertations and Theses at UNCG and Dissertations and Theses Global. So NC Docs is definitely a way, as are many institutional repositories, of letting people from around the world see your work, and making your work more accessible. It also obviously benefits you as an author, benefits researchers. There are other instances of electronic theses and dissertations showing up in other library databases. It's a relatively common source type for folks, and we'll talk more about how it's different from typical sources that you see. I suggest checking other institutional repositories. I was looking at one just this morning. UNC has the Carolina Digital Repository, or the CDR. And if you can't find what you're looking for, you can always submit, while you're a student or faculty member at UNCG, you can submit an interlibrary loan request, which comes at no charge to you. And I did check with the head of interlibrary loan, who says that that is definitely something that they can help with. So lots of different ways of finding these. We're going to explore a couple of them a little more closely. So Dissertations and Theses Global is a ProQuest database. ProQuest is just a major database company. They own lots of the different databases that we have access to. I recommend, excuse me, using the advanced search. I really like this tool because you can search by author, you can search by the advisor who assisted the dissertation author. You can search by committee member. Well, I actually don't think you can search by committee member. I looked that up, but you can view committee members. The institution, the date, the title, obviously, and more. They have metadata going back to 1606, and they have full text from 1997 to the present. Metadata, for folks who may not know, is data about data. So metadata would be like the title, or the date it was published, or the institution. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have the actual, like a PDF of it that you can see itself. It's sort of information about information. So from 1606 and then from 1997 on, they actually have metadata and full text in ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global. There are millions of dissertations and theses in this database, as we will see. So I came up with a sample research topic for today. I personally am interested in this topic, emotional labor, or it's sometimes called compassion fatigue, sometimes called burnout, among student affairs professionals at colleges and universities in the United States. So that's a sample research question that I thought we could use for some of our searching today. So I'm going to exit the slides at this point. There are a couple different ways that you could get to these databases. I have linked to some of them in the slides. I went ahead and put some of this in slide form because I saw that, of course, ProQuest is doing some maintenance on the database today, but we're going to see if it works. So if you go to library.uncg.edu and you scroll down to where it says databases, that will take you to our A to Z database list. We have hundreds of databases available to our users. It always throws me off because this is a ProQuest database, so I expect the title to start with P for ProQuest. It's actually under D for Dissertations and Theses Global, and you've got to scroll down a bit, or you could Control F, up to you. I'm going to scroll just to show off the wide variety of databases we have. Dissertations and Theses Global. It's different from Dissertations and Theses at UNCG. Obviously, Dissertations and Theses at UNCG is going to have a much smaller sample of work, but I'm going to start with Global. And I said earlier that I recommend the advanced search feature here. I'm going to start by showing you the basic search feature because there's no shame in that. If you just kind of want to search around, see what you can find. I am going to zoom in a little bit. So this may change the way that things are lined up in terms of boxes. I encourage you to use the basic search if that's what you want to start with. So I'm going to try student affairs and burnout. I'm keeping it very, very simple here just to kind of show you the basics of how this works. We're going to do some fancier footwork in terms of searching soon. So you could try that. And then, oh, and also for those who may not be super familiar, I'm using a couple different things here. One of them is called Boolean searching. That's where that and shows up. It is important in some systems to put the and in all capital letters, because if you put a small and, I don't know if this is the case in ProQuest, but I know in some systems, if you put and you don't emphasize it in capitals, it will use it as a filler word and it doesn't necessarily pay attention to what it is you're commanding. So student affairs is put in quotation marks. It's called phrase searching. I would encourage you to do that whenever you have a phrase. I would also encourage you to keep your phrases short. So student affairs tells the system, I want you to search both of those words together, that exact spelling in that exact order. And I want you to find things that include the word burnout. So it has to include both of those things. So I'm going to search, see what I get. I got 6,500 results. There are some new features in ProQuest databases that we can talk about. But I wanted to show you a couple things. I like to start with my searches nice and broad and then narrow them down from there. So on the left side here, normally there are quite a few filters in these databases. This is a little bit different. There are still filters and they are still useful. So I'll show you a couple of them. But keep in mind that these are certainly not the only options that you'll encounter in library databases. I'm going to enter a date range. So let's say I'm specifically interested in 2020 to 2025. I'm choosing those dates because I'm sort of also interested in the impact that COVID has had on student affairs professionals in terms of emotional labor and burnout. That cut my results, I think, about in half. And people frequently ask, how far back should I be looking for resources? There really isn't a good answer to that. It depends on what you're doing. If I was interested in historical research on student affairs and burnout, I might not put on a filter at all for date. Anyway, so I'm going to click on the title. Not that one. I'm going to click on the title of this one. I was looking at this earlier. Exploring the influence of parental work ethic and cultural norms on Latina OX first-generation millennial student affairs leaders at Fresno State. It's a very specific group of folks at a specific institution. I think that's kind of cool. I'm going to show you a couple other things. The first thing I want to show you is kind of new. So this research assistant, I think this is still in beta, but this is an AI feature that's starting to show up in some databases. What they're doing here, this first part, is summarizing the abstract, which to me is kind of funny because an abstract itself is a summary, right? But that's fine. There's also, additional topics that they're talking about. They do justify it. They say, this is why we're giving you this. The relationship to your search terms is why this showed up. I don't fault anybody who wants to use these tools. I don't find them particularly useful and also maybe a little distracting. So for me, I'm going to click this little right arrow here, and that's going to hide it. So up to you what you want to do there. This is 179 pages. Keep in mind that does include some front matter, as well as, a references page. You can see and kind of scroll through quickly on the left here. They've got acknowledgments. That's very common. There will be a table of contents in a lot of cases, which can be super helpful, obviously. I'm not going to go too far into this person's specific document, but I did want to just show you that. If you click on abstract and details, this is also some really interesting stuff. So the abstract, again, is a summary of what this is about. Scholarly journal articles often have abstracts as well. I really like that you can see, again, the person's advisor. You can see committee members. Committee members, that means like people who sat through the defense of the dissertation. It can also be people who probably were involved at other points. But I remember I sat in on a dissertation defense once, and it was literally the committee members and a couple guests in the room, plus the person's advisor. And they were telling us all about it. So it was super interesting. You can see the institution, you can see the degree that this person was earning. Lots of information there. This is the metadata that we were talking about earlier. I also like these subject and classification terms because if you are struggling to find information on a particular topic, or you're just finding that your keywords aren't quite what you wanted them to be, these can be great suggestions for things to search. So, not to spend too much time on this, the other thing I want to point out, and we're going to talk more about this later, is the cite tools. If you click cite, it will actually give you an automatically generated citation. To me, it's really odd that they're still doing APA 6 because APA 6 has not been the newest edition for quite a long time now. We are on APA 7. And I can tell you, I'm not super familiar with other citation styles. I'm very familiar with APA. This has multiple mistakes right off the bat. We'll talk about it more, but please use these tools with caution. And then the only other thing I want to say about this one is that if you wanted to download the PDF, you obviously can do that. If you wanted to link it so you could get back to it later, you can copy the URL. And of course, we have tools like Zotero. You can see my little Zotero extension up there. We will mention Zotero later on. So back to results. I actually want to show you how to advanced search, and then I need to move on because I'm running short on time. I like the advanced search tool here. We're going to do something similar, only we're going to get a little fancier with it. So I'm going to say student affairs or student affairs professionals. My dog is now beginning to whine. Sorry about that. Shh. And burnout or emotional labor or what was the other one? Compassion fatigue. And then I can actually add a row here. You can add, I think, a bunch of different rows. And I'm just going to do college or university. And I want to explain a little bit about what I've done here just quickly. So this is a much more specific in some ways search that I'm doing here. I'm telling it, give me things that include the phrase student affairs or the phrase student affairs professionals, those exact words, and at least one of the terms from this line, and the term college or, and the reason I put the asterisk here, this is called truncated searching. That's going to give me university and universities, which I find to be useful. So anyway, very quick search here. We got 7,241 results, so a little bit more, I think, than we did when we did the basic search. Again, you can narrow things down. I'm not going to spend more time on this because we need to move on to a different database, but I just wanted to make sure to show you those basic features. I believe you can log into this system and save some things. In my personal experience, I've found it to be unreliable. So if I'm going to save something and try to come back to it later, I'll probably use a citation manager like Zotero. And then just really quickly, let's look at the UNCG specific version of this database. I promise it will be brief. I'm going to scroll down. And it should be right underneath it's right above Dissertations and Theses Global. This is the UNCG specific version. The search interface is similar. What I like about this is that I can get pretty specific with it. So I know someone who published their dissertation at UNCG in the last couple of years. So I scrolled down, or actually I think I clicked, did it open on the advanced search? I think I did advanced search and then scroll down. Anyway, look up authors, and I'm going to put in this person's last name. Okay, this is helpful for current students. I think it's pretty useful for current students. And I'm going to add to search. Okay, So if you know of someone in your program who recently published a dissertation, you want to see how it went for them, the things that they were working on, who advised them. This can be really useful, I think, especially within your own institution. So you have the dissertation here. You have references, which are usually, many of them will be linked. You can pretty easily check for the text somewhere else. Sometimes it's easier to find it than others, but I do like this tool because it can kind of quickly connect you. I looked up this person. I'm sort of pretending that this is a history dissertation. And so let's say I was a student in history. I knew this person and I maybe had similar research interests and wanted to look up who was advising them. You can see that the advisor is Dr. Mark Elliott. You can also see the committee members. So many times you will be called on to sort of form your own dissertation or thesis committee. And so this can be really useful within your own institution if you are maybe not as familiar with faculty who are willing to take on dissertation students. That can be really helpful. You can also, as I said before, search by advisor. I am going to search a different department for this. If you go to advanced search, I'm going to search advisors. I'm going to search for someone named Paul Sylvia, who's a psychology professor here and a prolific writer. Notice that there's a Paul Sylvia and a Paul J. Sylvia. I'm 99% sure it's the same person, so I'm going to go ahead and select both and add them to my search, and then click search. And I can see all 15 theses and dissertations that Paul Sylvia has served as an advisor on. And I could look through these and say, okay, what do they have in common? Is this someone who might make a good advisor for my own research? So that's a very, very brief overview of those databases. Let's see if I missed anything. I think we got most of it. Talked about the AI research assistant. I do want to briefly talk about NC Docs. Excuse me. So NC Docs, again, is our institutional repository. There are theses and dissertations, excuse me, from about 2006 to the present. There are also some older ETDs. There are other student work examples. I mentioned that not everybody is doing a dissertation or a thesis in the traditional way. There are some DNP, which is Doctor of Nursing Practice, I want to say, final projects, honors papers, some other large student projects from departments that don't actually submit official ETDs. And NC Docs, just to give you a very quick view of the interface, it doesn't like it when I do it in Chrome. I'm going to try it in Firefox. And I've linked to it in the slides so you have this. This is NC Docs, and this will soon be migrating to another platform. It's called Digital Greensboro, and we have an NC Docs expert in the house who can maybe during our Q&A, if there are questions about the specific platform, we could talk about it. What I like about this, again, is that it's open source. So this would be helpful to you even after you graduate. And you can look specifically at theses and dissertations here. If I wanted to go, I could search advisors. Again, I could do that if I was interested. Degrees by discipline takes you to this page. And let's say I wanted to click on Doctor of Education. You scroll down. And there is a Doctor of Education dissertation in here. I'm admittedly not a power user when it comes to NC Docs. It is a powerful tool. Keep in mind that, I clicked on education just now, but there are different listings for education here. There's early childhood education. Are we talking about higher education? Sometimes clicking on a more specific subject heading may be beneficial, but you can see these here. And we'll talk in a few minutes about the relationship between ProQuest dissertations and NC Docs because there is a relationship. That's a super quick overview of NC Docs. I didn't want to dig in too much because of the platform change, but it is a valuable tool, and I would encourage you to keep using it even after it migrates. And shout out to Anna Kraft, who's our coordinator of scholarly communications, for helping me with this, because I did not realize that it is quite powerful with the theses and dissertations. I also recommend site searching to people sometimes. If you haven't tried that before, you're basically just opening up a new tab and you're doing site and then the URL of the site. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell your browser, hey, I specifically want to search the text of this website for XYZ. So let's say I wanted to look for Kellum, the name of the person who wrote the dissertation earlier. This could take me to Linda Kellum's profile. There are other ways to do this, by the way. This is just sort of some of my shortcuts. You can sort by date of publication. There's Linda's dissertation. You could also sort by the number of views. Linda has a ton of views on some of these things. That's really cool. Again, very quick and dirty overview of NC Docs. I did not even scratch the surface. Very quickly, dissertations and theses are what we call gray literature. So I just wanted to be sure to point this out for people who may be considering using theses and dissertations in their own research as sources. Keep in mind that they are not considered scholarly sources and they're not considered popular sources. They're kind of somewhere in the middle. And we have a really good tutorial on gray literature, which includes information about theses and dissertations. It's part of our Ultra tutorial suite, which I highly recommend. So I put a link to it there. You could flip through it, learn some more about gray literature. This is a screenshot of something from the tutorial. You can see, so you have articles, books, gray literatures over here, including dissertations and theses. Journals many times are considered scholarly, not always, but many times. Books can also be scholarly. Magazines and newspapers tend to be popular. It's just kind of a mix of things, but gray literature is like this other category. So just keep it in mind when you're searching, because many times I've seen students mistake dissertations and theses for scholarly journal articles because, you know, if you're newer to doing research, you may not recognize like the signs of a dissertation or what that means or what that looks like. So I just wanted to be clear that there are definitely differences. I think that dissertations and theses are perfectly valid sources to use, but there are times when you are being specifically asked to use one format, and I don't want you to be in a position of mixing that up. This is a diagram that I always use in my teaching, scholarly and popular sources, kind of explaining the difference. Keep in mind, gray literature doesn't fall into either of these categories, but if you're interested in learning more about those distinctions, I always think this is interesting and useful. So I would encourage you to check it out. And I have a machine readable PDF available there. Citing electronic theses and dissertations, every citation style is going to have its own guidelines for citing these things. So I highly encourage you to check. And I have linked here to examples from APA, MLA, and both methods of Chicago. I really love APA style blogs, so I clicked on that one. You can see where things are supposed to go. It does give you some details here. So I encourage you to check that before you cite these. It is not the same as citing a journal article or a book. A few other thoughts on citation. I know that people really love those automatically generated citations, like the one we saw in the database a little while ago. I suggest a resource called ZBib, which we don't have time to go to in depth, but ZBib creates automatically generated citations. And while no system for citation is perfect, like none of these technologies are going to do it perfectly. Sorry, I need to go back. While none of these are perfect, I do think that ZBib tends to be relatively high quality. What I always tell people is check the citations against the official guidance. And you're like, well, what's the official guidance? This stuff. Check it against these things before you turn something in with the citation on it, no matter where you obtained it, no matter where you got it from. Zotero is a citation management software. It is open source. So is ZBib. Zotero is the company that makes ZBib, as a matter of fact. I would encourage you to use those sorts of tools for your research. They're very powerful and can save you a lot of time. And I've linked to more information about each one. So please feel free to use those automatically generated citations, but check them before you actually put them into your written work. Preparation and submission is not something we have a lot of time to talk about, but this takes you to UNCG's specific guidance on theses and dissertations. There are extensive instructions. This is from the graduate school. There are policies. There are all sorts of things here that you'll need to look at depending on both the level of study as well as your department. Just be aware of those things. you would submit if you were, let's say you were doing your dissertation this year, getting ready to submit it, you use the guidelines. There are particular publishing requirements to be aware of. They do require that you submit your work to ProQuest Dissertations and Theses, which then, I said there was a relationship with NC Docs. ProQuest will then share those files with NC Docs. So your dissertation ends up in both places, or your thesis ends up in both places. Depending on what you submitted, there might be other paperwork for you to do. There are sometimes associated fees, and I believe you have the option to embargo. And what that means is you could say, okay, I don't want this to be available online for a year after I publish it. And there are multiple reasons why somebody might do that. We could talk about that. But I believe you do have the option to embargo. And then how can the libraries help you? Just as I'm wrapping up here, we have access to millions and millions of journal articles, more than 1.5 million ebooks, lots of other source types that we have access to, all kinds of archival material, audio, visual stuff. So as you're doing research to complete your thesis or dissertation, I encourage you to take advantage of those resources. We have a robust interlibrary loan system. There is a research librarian for every department, which means that those are people who are specialists in the type of research that's being done in those departments. And they can meet with you individually to talk about your research, give you some tips. Those are really valuable resources. We have subject guides and some course guides, and these are we call them LibGuides. These are curated sets of resources for people studying these particular topics. I encourage you to check out the subject guide for your program. We do Zotero consultations, research consultations, and then obviously that pretty extensive tutorial suite. And this is just a little bit about how the libraries can help you. There's obviously much more. Other resources, again, that graduate school page we looked at, I highly recommend checking into that. There's also a networked digital library of theses and dissertations you might be interested in looking at. And then there is the Center for Research Libraries, which has theses and dissertations from outside of the US. So if you're interested in that. There is also an open version of ProQuest Theses and Dissertations, or Dissertations and Theses Global. I haven't used it myself, but I have seen it mentioned several times online, and so that could potentially be a resource for you after you graduate. There is an open version. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Rachel. I just wanted to note, in case people have to go, because we're a little past time, that I put a link to a assessment form to the next webinar, which is September 23rd. It's on Up to Date, a new resource we have in the library, and where you can sign up in all our past recordings. So there is no questions in the chat. I know you were sharing your screen, Rachel, but if anyone has any questions and would like to ask them now or in the chat, now's a great time.
Thanks for this, Rachel. This was really good. One thing I want to add in terms of theses and dissertations and availability and embargoes is that anyone that is completing a thesis or dissertation or has completed one and it's already in NC Docs and you're considering embargoes or wanting to embargo something from the past, you should contact the graduate school. They are the ones that manage that, and though the library is the institution that hosts NC Docs and would actually make the change to any embargoed content, the graduate school is the entity that has to sign off on all of that. So anytime there's any kind of question about embargoes and NC Docs, it actually has to start at the graduate school. So we work closely with them. Thank you.
Yeah, and Anna is the expert on all things NC Docs. That is helpful. Anna was great about helping me with some questions I have with it before this presentation. So if you all have questions about NC Docs or those systems, we definitely have folks who can help. One other thing I was going to mention is that the library does not keep printed copies of theses and dissertations. I believe the one exception is that our special collections and university archives might have some. I don't think they're recent, and I don't think there are a whole lot of them. But there will be people every once in a while who'll be like, oh my gosh, I want to see a printed copy of my dissertation on the shelf. And that's not actually something that we do. Many libraries no longer do that. You can request a printed copy, I believe, through the graduate school. And as Greg Bell says, he's the dean of the graduate school. I've heard him say this many times. The best dissertation is a finished dissertation. The best thesis is a finished thesis. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good as you're writing out there. So, yeah, I'm happy to take questions later if people think of them.
Are there any other questions? You're getting praise in the chat, Rachel. You've gotten, a couple of different emojis.
Thank everyone.
There.
I love the
Gabriella, did you have a question? Giving praise. I see someone typing in the chat too, so I'm gonna wait a second.
Sure. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. Miss Olson, I met you during a tour for
Nice.
the library tour, and then I saw this and I was like, absolutely, and this was wonderful. I learned a whole lot. I'm one of those students that you were talking about making it perfect, and so that's been a bit of my trouble. So if I can get over that hump in my head, I think everything will be smooth sailing. So I appreciate all the information you provided today.
That's great. Thank you for coming. And definitely get in touch with your subject librarian. And we're always here, happy to help folks. So thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Yeah. It looks like Nia might be typing something. Can hang on a second. Trying to think if there are other things. We don't yet have a tutorial on theses and dissertations. Maybe I'll turn this into one or something. I've been meaning to write one for a while.
But you have the slides now.
We have this. I could basically just turn it into
a recording, a YouTube recording, slides.
There you go. That's
You're halfway there. I did a long class the other day on psych info, just psych info.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wish there was a way, but there was just too many things in it. You had to turn it into a recording on psych.
Yeah.
There's just too many things.
Nia says, what in-person libraries would you recommend outside of UNCG to find potential sources for a thesis? Yeah, great question. So UNCG students with your Spartan card, you have borrowing privileges from all UNC system schools, as well as what we call TALA schools, which is like Triad Area Academic Library. I'm going to butcher that. Sorry to the people on the recording who see this later. Greensboro colleges and universities and the area. So you could go to any of those libraries. I know that many public libraries, not all, but many, let's say that they have NC State has lots of databases that we don't have access to because they have just a larger budget. You can go, and if you go in person, you can get guest access to their databases and you can use them on campus. In many cases, call first. Other in-person libraries outside of UNC, A&T has a fantastic library. Kind of depends on what you're interested in and what subject area you're in, but I'm happy to make recommendations. If you want to get in touch, I'll drop my email in the chat. If that's useful.
Great. So, any other questions? Okay. Y'all have Rachel's email. Be on the lookout in the next couple of days for the recording. I'm in that time period in September where I have a ton of meetings and consults. So if it's a little delayed, that's on me. But thank you again, Rachel. And thank you everyone for coming, and have a great week. We're almost to the weekend. So have a great end of your week, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, y'all.